All right, let's head over to the Zoom line. Shelley Paul is with us, 318 Project. Now, Shelley, this is the first time I've ever interviewed someone with this title before. All right, so this is my first time saying this title, so ladies and gentlemen, if I mess up, I do apologize. Shelley Paul's title for the 318 Project is Human Trafficking Survivor Mentorship Program Coordinator. Is that correct?
That is correct. You did very well with that.
Wow. Now that is a very specific yet very broad title. Talk to me a little bit about your title, some of the stuff that you work on, and then we're going to get into some mental health aspects of human
Okay.
trafficking.
Okay. Well, what I do is I have over 30 years of experience working in the behavioral health field. And currently, I work with survivors of human trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking, and then also sexual exploitation. And when I accepted this job, I thought, oh, that sounds like a pretty easy job. I can handle that. How many, human trafficking cases can there be in North Dakota? And that was quite a naive thought on my part because it has been very busy. And in the over 2 years that I've worked with 318 Project, it has been very enlightening to realize that I was so wrong in a lot of different areas. It is happening a lot more than people realize in North Dakota, and particularly in rural areas in North Dakota. So, um, I meet the survivors, do an intake, and then we pair them with mentors. Because really, a lot of these survivors, they require a lot of services. A lot of times, there are a great deal of mental health needs, substance abuse, and just some independent living life skills in general. So it is a very busy position, and we network a lot with other community partners. Mhm.
The Bakken Summit is coming up as well. Let's take a couple
Yes.
minutes and give the details for those individuals who are interested in attending the Bakken Summit. Of course, a lot of the information will be available after the summit is done. I know there's some great speakers lined up, as well as some awareness training, I believe, or something along those lines. So tell us a little bit about the Bakken Summit.
Absolutely. This is the fifth annual Bakken Human Trafficking Summit that we are holding here in Bismarck this year. It is May 20th and 21st, and is going to be held at St. Mary's Central High School. That is our location. And yes, it is 30, we bring in experts across the United States, and this year we are having breakout sessions, keynote speakers. We have some survivors that are going to be sharing their story. There are also a panel of both local survivors and also those that will be presenting. And it's a great opportunity to do some networking with other community providers that are providing services and get to know what's available out there. This human trafficking has, there's a lot of attention now with what's going on in the country. I think it's bringing awareness and light to this important topic that many people, try to avoid because it is a very kind of a dark topic. We don't like to realize that some very dark things are happening in our community. But
I'm
it
glad
is
you brought that. I'm glad that you brought that up because that actually goes into my first question. By the way, 318project.com, I'm sorry, 318project.org is the website. 318project.org is the website for anybody who's looking for some additional information or the website on the organization. So, mental health isn't anything new here, and we can talk about how it's evolved. Whether George Carlin actually does a very good one, how he goes through the evolution of shell shock to PTSD, and really talks about how just the changes in the evolution of that. And the way that I really kind of look at that is where the funding comes from and then where the resources come from. I grew up in an alcoholic family, and so I was very sensitive to alcoholism. I was an
Mhm.
Alateen, Al-Anon, if you will, forcefully by my parents growing up. But because of that, I became very sensitive to what the instructors were like. And what
Mhm.
I found, at least when it came to the world of alcohol, the best ones were the former drunks, were the ones that
Mhm.
had the 5 DUIs, and those type, the ones who got shunned by society were the best ones to go work on that issue. When we're
Mhm.
talking about human trafficking, or we're talking about homelessness, or we're talking about some of these issues that the public necessarily does not want to talk about. They want to shun it away. Talk to me a little bit about like your role, the leadership role, because right now there's a lot of funding going to this
Mhm.
particular problem. And not
Mhm.
always the best groups get it, or the most passionate groups, if you will. And I know the 31.8 Project is one of the top passionate and trustworthy ones. So I feel very comfortable asking this question to you because
Mhm.
I know the group. But talk to me a little bit about the responsibility that you have dealing with mental health, because it is a very difficult subject to talk about, let alone deal with on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah, it really is because, oftentimes when you think about vulnerabilities that individuals that have that lend itself to be maybe for them to be more vulnerable to be trafficked or exploited, it's not uncommon for them to have perhaps some mental health problems to begin with. And then due to the severe trauma and abuse that and deprivation that occurs with human trafficking, it is a recipe that it could be disastrous if they're not provided with quality services. Oftentimes, the survivors they're not sure who to trust, or they've had a lot of trauma, so it takes a great deal of time and resources and energy to be able to establish that rapport and trust with survivors. um, and so there has to be concerted effort to provide trauma-informed, person-centered care, so that we know we don't do any further traumatization to these individuals, but really meet them where they're at and respect them to that it is their story, and respect them enough that in their time, they will be able to get the services they need. I always joke there was a survivor that I worked with, continue to work with a great deal. And I always joke with her and I tell her, man, you made me work really hard. I said, I drank a lot of coffee by myself because she would continue to say she would meet me. And then at the last minute, she would get fearful that I may be setting her up, or was it real? Would somebody really want to meet with her to offer her services? She was a little suspect on our mission, or if we were really trustworthy. And so we joke about that now. And she talks about how working with 318 Project and being involved with the mentorship program. And we have a group for survivors that meets every other week. And that has been very helpful for many of our survivors to be able to share with other individuals that have that lived experience and can understand what they're talking about and what some of the emotions and different things, the trauma that they've experienced firsthand. And so, it can be very challenging to establish that rapport. But just due to that severe abuse, oftentimes our survivors, when they first get out of the life, if you will, there's a lot of acute stress reactions, a lot of shock, confusion. Sometimes they have some emotional numbness where there's a lot of denial that it really even happened. There can be some flashbacks, nightmares, depression, and a lot of substance abuse. So, a lot of times, our survivors need um, to work with somebody that understands all different realms of mental health, because you really have to provide all the pieces of the puzzle, and all the services that are needed. And really, everybody's healing journey is very individualized to what they need.
And you also have short-term and long-term
Hmm.
effects that can really cloud and confuse the issue because not only is everybody's journey and healing individual, but you don't know where the triggers are coming from and you don't know what degree they're going to come from. And I think that is very hard for people to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it took a personal experience, like it always is. I'm a method journalist, so I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
go skydive before I write on skydiving. And
Right.
before I got into really covering mental health as deep as I have, I had to go through some different walks. And honestly, being a reporter, you find yourself in a lot of areas you don't want to necessarily be in. And
Mm-hmm.
being a young teenager from my family, you do the same thing. So, through a variety of different events, I have found myself in a few precarious situations. And one of them, I ended up having a gun to my head.
Oh.
And the gun was pushed up against my head, and it was even turned a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I still to this day will have a flashback, a PTSD flashback of that moment. And that was a
Mm-hmm.
pretty timid, tame moment
Mm-hmm.
where but I can feel that steel. And
Mm-hmm.
I honestly, I don't even know where the triggers come from sometimes. I'll just be driving and it will come. Now I can control it and I can do a number of these things, but I still feel it and it rushes in me and
Mm-hmm.
it comes with adrenaline and a different fear and fight or flight type of thing. So talk to me a little bit about the short term and long term because that is so hard to process and understand.
Absolutely. You're spot on with that. And what we find is that, those immediate, the short term, there can be a lot of the emotional dysregulation that goes along with that. Panic attacks, severe anxiety, feeling worthlessness, hopelessness. Like I said, that sometimes individuals, survivors will turn to drugs or alcohol in order to self-medicate or to cope with that emotional pain. But then as we go on into the longer term healing, the longer and more severe cases of human trafficking, the long-term exposure can be some real complex PTSD, and that really can lend itself to some real chronic symptoms and some real deeper emotional pain and interpersonal disturbances. Um, but some of those longer term effects can affect their relationships, their attachment to others. Healthy relationships can be difficult and challenging after they are no longer in a human trafficking situation. There's a lot of betrayal and exploitation. And sometimes, if they don't get the help that they need, they can find themselves being vulnerable to being in another unhealthy relationship. There can be a lot of fear of intimacy and trust in relationships because they've been hurt and, abused in the past. So they're not really sure on who to trust, or sometimes they're not even sure what a healthy relationship looks like. But then we also know that long term consequences can be some physical and somatic complaints, lots of physical aches, pains, headaches, stomach aches, chronic pain. There continues to be a lot of stigma and isolation that our survivors suffer from. Fear that others won't believe them, they're going to be judged. Society sometimes can be very cruel and say, well, you're nothing but a prostitute anyway, if they don't really take the time to understand. It's a very complex problem that they themselves were unable to get out of those situations. But yeah, there can be a lot of fear that can really lead them into a life of isolation and withdrawing from the community. So, severe mental health problems, substance abuse. We thought, according to Stacy, the founder and director, when they wrote the program, they thought that if survivors would be in our program for 1 year, they would basically have what they need to be able to go out and enter society and live a, very successful life. But what we're finding is it is taking upwards of 3 years for survivors to receive the services that they need, due to the, deep psychological damage that has been done, the physical. Oftentimes they are needing substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, due to being victims of some very horrendous abuse. Mhm.
Oftentimes, family members are involved with the human trafficking, which can only layer in some of the mental health. And when we're talking about trust issues, trust with the
Mhm.
family, we're talking about even some organizations now. Does this bleed into how much can the organization do to help them? Because in their mind, they have a different outcome than what the organization can do as well. And that's why
Mhm.
it takes a little longer than anticipated, because you're dealing with some soul wounds here.
Mhm.
And a lot of empty promises, a lot of empty
Mhm.
words, and a lot of trust with people that you love, traditional sense, whether it be friends or
Mhm.
family. That has a whole different realm of mental health in that aspect, because when you're talking about human trafficking, they don't know where to go. It's hard
Mhm.
to know where to go. Talk to me a little bit about the family and the friends, and how that's not always the easiest for individuals when it comes to the support staff or the supporting, I guess,
Mhm.
group that a survivor would have in a traditional sense, like an alcohol or something like
Right.
that, right? Talk to
Yeah.
me a little bit about
Right.
that. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's important to remember that every survivor has a story, and their story is very different from one another. We have some survivors we work with that grew up in some very great families. Some of the survivors may have run away from home and found themselves being vulnerable in that type of situation. Um, Others, it can be growing up in a home that their parents or their family members may suffer from some mental health problems themselves, or substance abuse, or there can be abuse within that home. There can even be familial trafficking, which is very not uncommon by any means. And so it's really important. For example, when I go out and when 31/8 goes out, I should say, and speaks to children's school, we can't assume that everybody is growing up in a safe, secure environment within their home life. And so one of the exercises that we do is we always, we share the information, of course, age appropriate, but we always, share with them some, concerning behaviors, if certain things happen, what they can do. And we always have them identify at least three individuals that are safe for them, because we know sometimes family is not a safe person for them. And it's really interesting that oftentimes, children will say, my friend's mom and dad, or my coach, or my teacher, or the police officer, and things like that. So I think it's really important that we don't assume that everybody's family is a safe place for others. One of the things that I always encourage community members to do, and it's one of our missions within 31/8, is to provide education and awareness about human trafficking, online safety, and those sorts of topics, so that people can understand, because there seems to be a denial that it happens. And so and sometimes people say, those of us that live in North Dakota, we can be somewhat naive. We're very trusting. And so if a child or somebody talks to you about, a concern that they may have, take it serious, and investigate a little further and have open communication with that individual, to find out really what is going on. Are there some warning signs or red flags that person is trying to tell you. And I'm really happy to hear that. Um, in my role, I work with a lot of law enforcement agencies, and most of them do have resources, officers, and resources dedicated to this exact topic, where those officers will receive further training and kind of become experts, if you will, in law enforcement. If community members turn to them about what is going on, that they are also being trained in trauma informed care. So I think that society is certainly moving in the right direction with training um, family members, friends, community, law enforcement to be more compassionate when it comes to this topic with human trafficking, sexual exploitation, especially in the times we live today with social media and things along those lines, which can be um, very risky for a lot of individuals.
You mentioned frontline workers, and
Mhm.
when we talk about mental health, frontline workers, educators, family members, and in 318 Project volunteers,
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit about some of the things that they might deal with and how the organization, the 318 Project, is training and helping assist some of these frontline workers, these educators and volunteers.
Okay. Well, I think it's really important that um, those frontline workers that have and parents are frontline workers. They get to know their children. So I think that it's important that everybody and 30 agencies like 318, going out and presenting presentations and information, whether it's written, whether it's videos, books, provides resources to educate the community about warning signs. It's important how we approach the subject. We need to also be mindful that trauma-informed care needs to be first and foremost, because we do not want to re-traumatize others. But by showing compassion and providing a safe, supportive environment where people will feel comfortable being able to share their experience and disclose what has been going on is imperative to get them the services that they need. Um, we're lucky in North Dakota, Bismarck. We do have a lot of clinicians that we work with that are trained in different treatment modalities to address trauma. Um, but we also know that it is important that we watch in the for different behavior changes, emotional changes with those we come into contact with. If we're seeing some of these changes in their emotional, behavioral changes in their communication or expression, any of those types of things, it's important that we ask open-ended questions to find out what is going on in their lives, so that we can intervene in an appropriate manner and get them the services they need. It's also important to take care of those frontline workers. It's important, such as 318 provides a very safe, supportive environment for our work. Um, we know that working in human trafficking, domestic violence, it can be a very heavy topic to work in and day out. We hear a lot of very traumatic stories. So it's important that our work environment provides a safe, supportive environment for us as well. And so that we can do some debriefing, some consultation, supervision with our supervisors, and maybe even get involved in some therapy ourselves to ensure that that secondary trauma does not interfere with our life. Because I have seen throughout my career where if we don't take care of ourselves, it can lead to burnout. It can lead to a lot of compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. So it not only affects us, but also our family and friends as well. So, yeah.
What are some warning signs that people should be aware of? Just some basic
Mhm.
ones.
Okay. I think, especially, if you know the individual and you see some of those changes, maybe they have over a short period of time become very guarded. They don't feel comfortable talking to you. Somebody answers their questions for them. So it may appear that they're very controlled, and they're not able to, they're changing their friends or activities that they do. You might want to find out what is going on. It could be they are in a situation where they are being controlled. Um, in a trafficking situation, it is not uncommon for the survivor to not have access to any of their IDs. The trafficker oftentimes will keep their driver's license, social security cards, passports, birth certificates as a way to control them. Um, Sometimes that I've had survivors where the individuals withheld food from them. They've kept their clothes and thought that that would be a way that they control them because they'd be less likely to escape. Um, Frequent job changes, frequent moves from community to community, maybe missing work a lot, missing school a lot, being tardy. So there can be a lot of different warning signs, bruises, black eyes, and so I think that if we are aware of it and try to visit with individuals and establish that rapport and trust within them, they're much more likely to be willing to open up and take a chance, and let you into their life about what is going on. Because oftentimes they are very fearful and not trusting. Mhm.
Wanted to ask you about social media, and then we will wrap up with some information and resources. But when it comes to social media, there's a couple things I'd like to say before you give us some
Mhm.
insight on how somebody, either from a parent's perspective or from a workplace or, authoritative perspective, on how to
Right.
observe. Because I say this story almost every time I do one of these interviews, because I don't think people realize how important it is to understand what's happening on the world of social media.
Mm.
So
You
in the world
got
of
that right.
in the world of sex trafficking, it is a job for people. It is a 9 to 5 minimum type of a job. And part of that job is they go and they recruit people on social media. And once they recruit you on social media, it could be 6 years later. It could be 3 years later. It could be 10 years later. It does, as long as they have your information and there's a person willing to show up to a desk, they will continue to try to traffic that piece of information. And what opened my eyes is that they go after kids when they're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and then get
Absolutely.
them when they're 16, get them when they're 17. All they need to have is a fight with their boyfriend, fight with their parents, have one bad day. That's it, just one bad day. And that person that shows up every day that gets paid to traffic just hooked them right there. And so, for those people who have heard me give this speech before up on my soapbox, I do it for a reason, because it's powerful. Like, people need to understand that this is a business that people invest a lot of time and energy into, trafficking children. So sorry to do that a little bit, but I think it's very important that people understand the power of social media, especially when we're talking about trafficking.
Absolutely. That grooming piece is so important. And now with the advancements with technology and artificial intelligence, anybody can go online and say they're somebody, pull a picture from somebody and say, this is me, when in fact, it really is not. So you might have a youth that is thinking they're talking to somebody their same age, and really it can be an adult male or female that is looking to just gather information to exploit them with at a later time. And we hear those cases all the time, which is so sad. And it can take years, but it also can happen much quicker than one would think. Within days, I've heard of somebody being kind of hooked in. So it can be very, very scary time for social media, and it is so important that parents keep track of what is going on in their children's lives, be present, keep those lines of communication open, and so talk to them, educate them, um, and let them know the dangers that are out there. One of the areas I really stress when I present to parents and adults and community is like, it's not uncommon, of course we want our children to follow our rules and what we say they should follow, but we know that sometimes they're going to take some risks. But it's really important that if a child comes to you and says, Mom or Dad, I made a mistake and I'm really scared. I gave somebody my personal information and now they're doing this. As parents, sometimes the first thing we want to do is say, I told you not to do that. You're too young to have a phone. Give me your phone. You're not going to have this till you're 16 years old, and, be a bit reactive. Well, that doesn't really help, because what happens is if that were to ever happen again, that child is less likely to come to you. So I think that it's important how we react when our children come to us and say, I made a mistake. I did this. Look at it from a teaching, a learning experience for that child, and use it again to again highlight the dangers that can be lurking out there and why it's important, even if you think it's a trusting relationship. And we see it now with even gaming. There's a lot of individuals, especially young males, females, that are gaming with people around the world, you know. And the younger they are, the more they eh, they're naive. They don't think anything bad's going to happen to them, and if it is, they'll know. So they're very very vulnerable, especially at those ages.
What are some resources that people can lean on if they have questions or if they maybe are
Hmm.
starting to see some signs that are at least yellow, if not red?
Hmm. Well, 318 Project, we are a resource for the state, across the state of North Dakota. We do go out to they provide services throughout the state. As I talked about, one of our mission is to provide education awareness. So we do a lot of public speaking presentations to whether it's schools, community organizations, parents, a lot of different agencies, service organizations will request presentations. Um, but it's really important that we also work within a community. So we work with our safe homes. We might get a survivor that does not have a safe place to live. So we will look and work with our safe homes, maybe our abused adult resource center here in Bismarck for residential, a safe home. We work with the law enforcement. We work with the hospitals. We work with actually all of the community resources. When somebody contacts our agencies, we do an intake to find out what services are needed. And oftentimes they may not have food, they might not have money, they might not have a place to live, they might not have a job. They might not have a resume. So it is important that we work with all different service providers. Law enforcement is also, they have representatives on the North Dakota Task Force for Human Trafficking. There are many. agencies that do provide services, a lot of therapists. We get a lot of referrals from addiction, substance abuse treatment providers where somebody will come in for treatment, but then also have been a victim of trafficking. And so we partner with a lot of those. Um, the faith community. So I always tell people, whoever you feel comfortable contacting, that is fine. That can get that ball rolling, and other service providers can come together and offer services and intervene for whatever that they need. So we work really closely with many different organizations within Bismarck, the state of North Dakota, and sometimes it's even outside of North Dakota as well.
What's the takeaway that you like people to have from one of these summits or an interview like this, or when you go speak? It's hard to absorb this much
Hmm.
information. Doesn't even matter what it is. If it was fishing, it would be hard to absorb this much.
Right.
Maybe not fantasy football. For some reason, fantasy football sticks around in the noggin way too long. But especially when you're talking about these types of sensitive topics, they become very overwhelming to people. And
Hmm.
so, 318project.org is a great website to go and get some more information. But what's kind of just a takeaway that you like people to walk away with from something like this?
I think one of the things that really hits home for me is that we all need to be aware that we might live in a rural state, but we're not isolated or insulated from the same things that go on in big cities. And whenever we come across a situation where there is human trafficking, exploitation, it's like, I never thought it could happen to me. And so just being aware that we're all vulnerable at different times in our lives. And so not letting our guard down, but being aware of what some of those red flags are and when we might be um, being a bit more vulnerable, and that it can happen to anyone. It can happen to anyone. I've had individuals that found themselves in human trafficking situations for the first time in their life in their 40s. And a lot of times we do focus on, kids and youth, but it also happens to vulnerable adults as well. Hmm.
Shelley Paul with the 318 Project, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting this very important topic, and hope to see you at the Bakken Human Trafficking Summit on May 20th and 21st.